Okay, welcome everybody to today's lesson. We're going to have a look at parts of speech today, and this is really aimed at beginners. I'd like to help some people who find it very difficult to see whether the word is a verb or an adjective or a noun or an adverb or a preposition or a conjunction, because there are a number of different ways, a number of different tricks that you can use to identify whether a word is a verb or a noun or an adjective. Now, to do this lesson, I'd like somebody to give me a sentence to analyze. I'd rather it wasn't too long. I need one which is really about 10 words long, about that length, maybe 15. But I'm going to write it up on the board because I imagine it will just flash up on my phone for a few seconds. And I'd like to do one which you give me, really, just to show that I'm not cheating, I haven't got it all prepared beforehand, and that there are methods you can use with any sentence to find out whether the word is a noun, a verb, an adjective, or whatever, a conjunction. So I do need your help for this, guys. So if anybody has a suggestion for a sentence which I could analyze, I'd like to see it up here on my phone. Just put it in the chat box and it should come up on my phone, fingers crossed. But while I'm waiting for that, I will mention a few things. Certain things which, if you know and if you can use these ideas, you can use these tricks to work out what part of speech you are dealing with, what word class you are dealing with. But please don't forget about that example. I would like one of you guys to give me the example um, rather than I go and get an example from my bookshelf. But please put it on the phone. I'll keep my eyes peeled. Now, the first thing to remember is verbs. Yeah, a lot of people say to me verbs are doing words. And usually I look at them, my face clouds over, and I look at them in an unsatisfied way, and I tell them that verbs are not doing words. It's an okay explanation for a younger child, but it's not actually true. It's not true at all. Because the most common verb, okay, is this a sentence? Okay, that's not a sentence I can analyze. Well, there's not a whole sentence there that I can analyze. Please put one up that I can analyze. So verbs are not doing words. The first verb that you ever learn in any language is the verb to be, unless the language doesn't have the verb to be, in which case, lucky you. But the verb to be is the first verb that you learn in any language. And what you'll notice, okay, let's just take that easy one. I am driving my car. I am driving a car. That's a very easy one. Like one a little bit harder than that. You can test me here. You can give me something difficult. That one's very easy. So the verb to be has nothing to do with doing. That's the first thing you notice. If you say I am English, am has nothing to do with doing anything. And if you say I am happy, are you doing anything? No, you're just happy. So being has nothing to do with doing. I am watching a live stream on YouTube. Still pretty easy, guys. You're going to have to get something harder than that. I am watching a live stream on YouTube. It's very similar to the first sentence on YouTube. I'm just going to put YT because otherwise I won't be able to remember it. So you learn the verb to be first because it's the most useful verb. You need it to express yourself in a lot of different ways, and it's certainly the most common verb in the English language. So please learn am, is, are, was, and were as the 5 different forms of the verb to be, and then you will see it in sentences much quicker. But the real definition of a verb is not a doing word. It's a word where it has a subject. Always. Verbs always have subjects. Adjectives don't have subjects. Nouns don't have subjects. Prepositions don't have subjects. In fact, none of the other parts of speech have a subject. But a verb always has a subject when it's in a finite form. But it always has a subject, a verb. In a main clause, a verb must have a subject. And all I mean is it has an I, a you, a Dave. Maybe it's a noun like the car. But verbs always have a subject. So that's why to be is a verb. It always has a subject. Well, not for gerunds on participles, but I don't want to complicate things. The main reason why to be is a verb is because you say I am, he is, you are. I was, they were. It changes according to the subject, and that's what verbs do. So there are a few verb tests you can do. Verbs that are not modal verbs, there are a few exceptions to even this test. Modal verbs don't pass this test. Can, could, would, should, might, must, may, they're all modal verbs. But ordinary verbs will always be able to go to plus verb, to plus infinitive, to be, to want, to have, to play, to like, to love, to hate, etc. You'll also be able to add ing to the end of an ordinary verb, being, watching, playing, doing, going, having, studying. So that's telling you that it's a verb. And you'll also be able to conjugate the verb with different nouns. I play, he plays, okay? So that's your verb test. The only words that won't work there are modal verbs, but they will pass number 3. They just won't add an S. So you can say I can, he can. It sounds great, in fact, and that's showing you that can is a verb, but not an ordinary verb. It's a modal verb. So that's your verb test. Now, if you have a sentence like this, I am watching a live stream on YouTube. That does sound a little bit harder than I am driving a car, so we'll use that one. I am watching a live stream on YouTube. You take a word like I, you should immediately recognize these words as pronouns. I, you, we, he, she, they. But even if you don't recognize it as a pronoun, you know that you've got, in a sentence, you know you've got the subject always comes before the verb in English. Then you have the verb, and then you have the object. And guess what? That's exactly what we've got in this sentence. You've got the subject, which is the person doing the verb, the agent doing the verb, which is I. You've got the verb, which is am watching. Now, this is another thing to remember. In English, very often you'll see two verbs together. Here we've got the verb to be and we've got the verb to watch, both together. And they are together and they are making a tense. The tense is called present continuous if you're interested. But that's not actually important. The important thing is that you see that this is an auxiliary verb. We call it an auxiliary verb because it's not the main verb. It's just there to make the tense. And this is the main verb, watching. Okay? So we know that this must be a noun because subjects are always nouns. I can't emphasize that enough. You'll never see an adverb as subject. You'll never see slowly and then a verb straight away, and slowly is the subject, that verb. You need a noun. So this must be a type of noun. So even if you don't know it's a pronoun, you ought to say noun here. And of course it is a thing. Pronouns are nouns. They're just nouns that stand in for other nouns. So I is standing in for myself. And so I have to say it's a pronoun. In English, we don't actually make the distinction of, the verb doesn't show you whether it's male or female in English. In other languages it does, it's true, but the verb does show you if it's singular or plural, the subject, okay? But the verb will not show you if it's male or female in English. In other languages, yes. In English, no. We don't have verbs that show if a male or female is talking. We have pronouns that show it, he and she. They show you if a male or female is the subject. But we don't have verbs that show male or female endings. You know, there is no male or female ending in English. So we've got pronoun there, we've got verb there, and then we've got a. Now, a is a determiner, and you really ought to just learn the determiners as a and the, numbers, this, that, these, those, possessive pronouns, his, her, their, my, your, and quantifiers, much, many, few, little, some, any. Now, whenever any of those words go before a noun and they identify or quantify the noun, they are determiners. Not all of these words are always determiners. For example, little can be an adjective, a little car. It's an adjective, right? It's describing the car. But if you say, I have little time, I have little money, you're not saying that you've got very small money. You're saying you haven't got much money. So it's a quantifier then, and it's a determiner. But when you say that is a little house or that's a little book, that's an adjective and it passes the adjective test, a little book. Yeah, that's the adjective test. Can you put the word between a determiner and a noun? Because if you can, I guarantee it's an adjective. I mean, well, I'll give you a good guarantee. 99% sure that it's an adjective if it passes this test. Because if it's a determiner, like I have little time, notice we don't say a little time, I have a little time. Well, maybe we would actually. So this isn't perfect. It's not a perfect test because sometimes when you mean not much and you're saying little, it's a determiner. When you mean small, it's an adjective. And that's the distinction. This is why parts of speech are important, so that we know what the sentence actually means. We need to make it clear which part of speech we're using. So A is a determiner. A live stream. Well, live is technically an adjective, yeah? A live TV show passes the adjective test. A live performance, it passes the adjective test. And when we think about it, it's modifying stream. It's telling you what kind of stream you were watching. You were watching a live stream. So this is definitely an adjective, and adjectives modify nouns. So I know that stream is a noun, and anything you can count must be a noun. 1 stream, 2 streams, 3 streams, it must be a noun. Anything you can count must be a noun because you can only count things. You can't count slowly. Yeah, in the sense of 1 slowly, 2 slowlies, 3 slowlies. Of course, you can count slowly if you mean 1, 2, 3, because then it's an adverb. Slowly is an adverb and it's modifying the verb. And adverbs, by the way, are the most complicated part of speech because they do all of these jobs here. So make sure you familiarise yourself with all the jobs that adverbs do. Okay, so stream must be a noun. Now, this word, even if you don't know that it's a preposition, and I suspect that a lot of people don't realise it straight away, prepositions are often described as describing position in time and space. Well, that's true sometimes, and it's true with the word on. The cup is on the table, it's clearly describing position in time and space. But the real definition of a preposition is that it always has an object, which is a noun. And this word on is followed by a proper noun. I know it's a proper noun because YouTube is capitalized, which means it's the name of a thing, which means it's a proper noun, just like David or the BBC. They're both proper nouns. They're the names for things. So I know I've got a noun here, which means that if this word is not a determiner, which it isn't, it doesn't fall into the a and the numbers, this, that, these, those, possessive pronouns. It's not any of those there, and that list is pretty much exhaustive, more or less. It's all of the determiners there. I know it's not a determiner. Determiners go before nouns, and so it can only be a preposition. It's the only possible part of speech it could be. It can't be a conjunction, because conjunctions would have a whole long clause after them, like although. Conjunctions are words like although, if, before, after. You'll have a whole long clause after some of those words, whereas prepositions, you just see a noun. So I know this is a preposition as soon as I see a noun is there and there's no determiner. Okay, do you have a more difficult sentence for me to work with? Because I'm ready to try to analyse any sentence in terms of parts of speech. And I wrote these two at the top of the board because these are 2 lists that you will see all the time if you're ripping up a sentence in terms of parts of speech. You'll very often see determiner and there may be an adjective, that's why I put it in brackets, but determiners are always before nouns. They're always there. Last month I went to the zoo with my friends. Excellent example. Okay, last month I went to the zoo with my friends. I've got to say that it's not going to be too difficult for me, this one. Some words are harder than others to analyse in terms of parts of speech. So let's look at this one then. Last month. Now this one is the hardest word here. I strongly suspect that most people will look at this and say adjective, because it's describing the type of month. What kind of month is it describing? It's describing last month, not next month, not this month, but last month. And so they will say it's an adjective, and they are half right, but not wholly right, because really, determiners all used to be called adjectives. 200 years ago, every single determiner in English was known as an adjective. However, somebody pointed out that determiners cannot be taken out of the sentence. Ordinary adjectives can be taken out of the sentence and the sentence still makes sense. For example, I bought a new car. I bought a car. You can take new out of the sentence and it still makes sense. But what you can't say is, I bought car. And that's why A is a determiner. And that's why last is an adjective, just like A is an adjective, but it's also a determiner. Because we can't say, month, I went to the zoo with my friends. Okay, so it's an irremovable adjective, which is really what determiners are. They're adjectives which cannot be removed from the sentence without messing up the whole sense, the whole meaning of the sentence. So I would call this word a determiner rather than an adjective, but the determiners are adjectives. They certainly are adjectives. So another determiner would be next, and also this, and I've even written this down here, this month, this week, this year. That would be a determiner as well, and next would be a determiner too. Okay, month is clearly a noun. It's a thing. You can count it. You can say 1 month, 2 months, 3 months, and that's one noun test, which is very effective. You can often use to decide if the word is a noun. However, there are many nouns which can't be counted. For example, money. You can't say 1 money, 2 monies, 3 monies. So it's not a perfect test, but it will work for a lot of words which are countable. So I know that's a determiner and a noun. Now I have my subject, verb, object. I have subject, I. Now I know I is a pronoun. But notice that all the other words that I can substitute in for I are nouns. I can say he went to the zoo. I can say she went to the zoo. I can say Tom went to the zoo. I can say my car went to the zoo. I can say, a letter went to the zoo if I sent it. It's got to be a noun because subjects must be nouns. They always, always, always must be a noun. So I know that this is the subject, I know it's a pronoun. Now we've got went. Now this is an irregular verb, I know that because it's a very common verb. Again, the verb to go is extremely common. But you might not notice that straight away. I imagine that I'm at an advantage here, having been teaching English for a very long time. Of course, go is very often comes up as a verb in different tenses, and so it makes it easy to see certain words. But you should still be able to do this. You should still be able to look at this word went and think, can I say to? Now, you might say, I can't say to went. But think about other forms. Think about how went actually applies. You could do this, for example. You could say to yourself, I went to the zoo yesterday. I will go to the zoo tomorrow, and I am going to the zoo now. When you put it into past, present and future, you're testing the word to see if it works in tenses, and if it works in the future, if it works in the past, and if it does, it must be a verb. And notice that in all those examples, I always gave the verb a subject. I went to the zoo yesterday, I will go to it tomorrow, he is going to the zoo right now. So play around with the words, see if you can put it into verbal forms, see if you can put a subject before it, make it apply to tomorrow, make it apply to yesterday, because if you can, that means it's a verb. So this is definitely a verb. Now, to is an interesting word, because when you have to plus infinitive, to plus the verb, just treat it as a verb, don't treat it as anything else. But here we haven't got to plus the verb, we've got to plus the determiner plus zoo, noun. So I know that's a determiner, it's on my determiner list. I know that's a noun, it's a thing, I can count it as well, 1 zoo, 2 zoos, 3 zoos. And this word comes before a determiner and a noun. Now, there's only one type of word it could be if it comes before a determiner and a noun, and we see this all the time. Preposition, determiner, noun. To the zoo, in the garden, under the table, for my mother, by my grandfather. All of those units are saying preposition, determiner, noun. Preposition, determiner, noun. Now, of course, you can have an adjective there. You could say, last month I went to the wonderful zoo, or last month I went to the massive zoo. And then you will have an adjective in there as well, but you don't need it. It's removable. It's not a determiner. Okay. Now, what have we got next? We've got something which we don't know. Maybe you don't know what with is, so let's hold it and let's do the next two. You've got my, which is a possessive pronoun, so it's a determiner. You've got friends. Well, you can count friends. 1 friend, 10 friends, 20 friends, so it must be a noun. So have we got a very similar pattern again? Yes, we have. We've got preposition, determiner, noun. Now you can see I wrote this up on the board before you gave me that sentence, which means that it's a form that I see every day when I'm doing these parts of speech. And if you're unaware of it, learn it, because you will see it so often. And that's why the example that someone from somewhere has just provided me with, thank you very much by the way, it's shown you that twice you've got to the zoo, preposition, determiner, noun. With my friends, preposition, determiner, noun. With is a preposition. It's got nothing to do with time and space, but it's always followed by a noun, and very often with a determiner in between. With my friends. But you could say with friends. You don't need that determiner there, which is why the determiner is in brackets. It's to show that it doesn't have to be there. But prepositions must be followed by nouns, just like determiners must be followed by nouns. Okay, I hope that's clear. Does anyone else have any other sentence that they want me to analyse? Because if you do, please put it up on my phone and I will analyse it. I think I've still got some more time. So please, if you have any other sentence, challenge me, make me sweat. There's always certain words that I come across that are harder. And if anyone's wondering which dictionary they should use to check these kind of parts of speech, Macmillan is the answer. Macmillan Online Dictionary have a lovely, wonderful box at the top of a difficult word like that. They will tell you that as a pronoun, that as a relative pronoun. So whenever I have time, I like to read, but I prefer not to read in the evening. What a good sentence. Whenever I have time, I like to read, but I prefer not to read in the evening. Let's see if we can get all of that one down there. Whenever I have time, comma, well done on the comma, I like to read, but I prefer not to read in the evening. I like all the commas, they're all correct as far as I can see. So I'm not sure what your name is, but thank you very much for providing that excellent example. Oh, you've given me a difficult word to start with as well, with whenever I have time, so I'm going to have to think about that. I'm going to leave it, in fact, until later, and I strongly recommend leaving difficult words that you're not sure of until you do the rest of the sentence, because it will make it easier. But I have an instinct already as to what it might be. Okay, so I'm going to leave that whenever, because it's the hardest word there. I don't think you can immediately see what exactly it's doing. So let's do the other words first. I is a pronoun, we've got it again. It's the subject of the verb have. Have is a verb. I can say to have, I can say having, I can say I have, I can say he has. It changes, it must be a verb. Time is the object of the verb have, and objects, like subjects, must be nouns. So that's definitely a noun. We've got a pronoun, a verb, and then a noun. And then we've got a comma, and the comma is important. It's showing us the end of the subordinate clause. You can't just say, whenever I have time, full stop. It's an incomplete thought. And that's why we need a comma here, because the student is starting with the subordinate clause. Now they've got the main clause, which is I again, pronoun, like, again, verb, to like, liking, I like, he likes, it passes the test. Now we've got a to plus infinitive. Always take it together. Always take it together when it's to plus the verb. Never try to work out what to is. And the reason I say this is that you'll very soon discover that no other word in the English language can be substituted for to there. And that means that it's very unique. And we can't really call it a preposition. It's not followed by a noun. Often it is a preposition when it's followed by a noun. But when it's followed by a verb, we just treat both words as a verb. And notice to read, reading, I read, he reads, it passes our test. So we've got verb, verb. The second verb is the object of the first verb. If you like, what do you like? You like to read. Okay, now we've got a comma again, and it's because we're joining two main clauses together with a fanboys word. And you should always remember fanboys for conjunctions. If you have a fanboys word joining two clauses together, you must use a comma. And this is why the BBC have annoyed me recently, because I noticed that on their bite-sized website, they tell you to use fanboys without commas. Now, I'm not saying that it's not possible. It is possible with very small main clauses. However, in any book that you pick up, you will see this rule being used. The students just used it when they gave me this example. You will see main clause, comma, fanboys, main clause on any page of any book that you pick up in your kid's bedroom. And so I don't know why they're teaching the kids that they don't use commas with fanboys. You might not with really short main clauses, but in any of the books they're reading, they will notice that that's not how the books are published, and that's not the rule we follow, and that's why the BBC have wound me up recently. They've annoyed me. But this but is a fanboys word. It's joining I like to read to the second clause, I prefer not to read in the evening. So it's joining two clauses together. That means it's a conjunction. That's what conjunctions are. They join clauses together. Now again, we've got pronoun I, nice and easy. Like prefer, to prefer, preferring, I prefer, he prefers. It's a verb, of course. And then we've got a not. Now the not is changing the positive to read into a negative to read, which means it's modifying a verb. And if words modify verbs, they are adverbs. So this is an adverb, not, unless I'm very much mistaken. Please check it. Go to Macmillan Dictionary, look up not, or go to any other dictionary and see what it says in that dictionary. But I'm assuming it will say adverb as one of the main entries because it's modifying the verb to read. It's saying that you didn't read, you prefer not to read. So it's making that verb negative. So that's a verb again, we've done it already. And then we've got in the evening. So we know the is a determiner. We know evening is a noun, because you can say one evening, 2 evenings, 3 evenings. And look, determiner, noun again, preposition, determiner, noun. That's why I've written it up here, preposition, determiner, noun, because I see it all the time. And so you will see it all the time as well. It's very, very common pattern, and it's because prepositions must have an object. They must have a noun, the evening. Now let's come back to that whenever. Now I would say that the only function I can see this word performing is it's saying when you have time, yeah? When you have time. So if it's modifying when you have time, it's talking about at the moment that you have time, it's really modifying the verb have, whenever I have time. Yeah, whenever I have time. It's modifying a verb. And so I strongly suspect that if I look up whenever in a dictionary, it should say adverb. And so I will do that in a moment, by the way, because I'm not 100% sure with whenever. And you'll never be 100% sure with words. And that's why dictionaries are important. Do use those dictionaries. Do check these things. So I'll quickly check right now, because it's a word that I haven't looked up before. Okay, and I'm afraid to say I am wrong, as you very often find with these things. Whenever here is actually a conjunction. It's joining I like to read with I have time. So you can see that everybody makes mistakes as well. With this whenever, it's caught me out. Here we're actually saying I have time whenever, no, it's whenever I have time I like to read. Or we could swap them around and really this is what I should have done and then it would have given it away. What really we can do here is it's joining I like to read with I have time. Okay? And what we're saying is I like to read whenever I have time. And so it is definitely a conjunction. Shame on me for not seeing it. But when you can, with these words where you can change them round, conjunctions will sometimes be at the start here, like although it was hot, we went for a picnic. And here the whenever is doing exactly the same thing. Yeah, although it was hot, how about we stayed at home? That makes more sense. So what you can see happening here is that although is actually joining these two clauses together. And if we swap them around, it becomes more obvious. We stayed at home, although it was hot. Although is joining those two clauses together. And it's exactly the same with whenever, isn't it? When we think about it, I like to read whenever I have time, or whenever I have time, I like to read. So you can see that the whenever is functioning exactly the same as although. And I think my biggest mistake when doing this one with all of you is not doing the substitution test. I should have done the substitution test, because if I had done the substitution test, I would have seen that if works here, if I have time, I like to read. If is a subordinating conjunction. Although works here, although I don't have much time, I like to read. I've noticed I've changed it a little bit to make it more logical, but it is conjunctions that fit into this space. And if it's conjunctions that fit in, it must be a conjunction. So well done for catching me out, whoever gave me that that example, because it certainly did. I started to think it was talking about how often you have time. So, I mean, there are adverbs that would fit in there. Sometimes I have, but no, it wouldn't, would it? If you had an adverb like sometimes, you couldn't say sometimes I have time I like to read. It doesn't make any sense. Only conjunctions would work here. Although I have time I like to read, or yeah, only conjunctions. If I have time I like to read, what other one? Unless I don't have much time, I like to read. All of the conjunctions work there, so it is definitely a conjunction. But there's nothing easy about doing parts of speech. There's nothing easy about taking a sentence and ripping it apart. You'll always get caught by the occasional word. And so the moral of the story is use a dictionary. Always use a dictionary and you'll get better and better and better at doing this. Okay, so I hope that was interesting for you. I hope that it was pleasant for you to see that anyone can get caught out, that I certainly can get caught out too. It's not acting as an adverb when you look at it. It's not modifying the verb. It's actually joining this part to this part. Okay, in which case it's a conjunction. It's a joining word. Okay, I hope you've all found that interesting. I'm going to go and make myself a cup of coffee now, and I'll see you all soon.